ridge sticks out of the wall above, about 2 metres above the ground. This may have supported an upper floor or a walkway. Many brocks have fallen into ruin because local people carried the stones away to build their own homes. The best preserved brock is on Mousa, a tiny island off Shetland. this picture, strips of cloth are called clouties. They were left at Craigie Well in Inverness. All over Britain, valuable pieces of Celtic bronze work have been discovered by accident in rivers, lakes, bogs and springs. This bronze shield, decorated with red glass studs, was found in 1857 in the Thames at Battersea, London. When the tide is low, you can sometimes find amazing things in the River Thames as it flows through London. People have picked up beautiful Celtic metalwork lying in the Thames mud. Finds include swords, spearheads, shields, a cauldron and a helmet. Much more metalwork has been discovered in the river as it floats through the countryside on its way to the city. You can see several of the things that have been found on display in the British Museum and the Museum of London. There are so many of them that they cannot have been dropped into the river by accident. Celtic nobles may have wanted to show off their wealth by throwing some of it away. Burying the dead. The Celts were often buried with their belongings. We can use these objects to build up a picture of their lives. So this is a collection of pottery found in the warrior's grave at Stanway. At Stanway in Essex, archaeologists have discovered a cemetery where wealthy Celts were buried. Their bodies were burned and the ashes placed in the earth with all sorts of goods, including pots, weapons, jewellery and gaming pieces. And here is a picture of an archaeologist excavating a game board and counters that were found in the doctor's grave at Stanway. The wealth of the grave goods shows that these Celts were important people. They must have been nobles from the local tribe, the Trinovantes. The Stanway burials show that the Celts believed in an afterlife, another world where they could go on living the same sort of life that they had lived on Earth. Many of the goods had been deliberately broken. This was a way of sending them into the next world. This is a Roman glass bowl which belonged to one of the Celts, buried at Stanway, and an iron spearhead found in the warrior's grave. The wooden shaft had rotted away completely. At Wetwang Slack in Yorkshire, archaeologists dug up the bodies of two Celtic men and women, each with their own chariot. Perhaps this was done so that they could ride in style into the next world. Many of the goods buried at Stanway came across the sea from the Roman Empire. Roman writers tell us that their merchants sailed to Britain to buy wheat, slaves, tin and hunting dogs. In exchange, they supplied British nobles with wine, olive oil, precious glass